in your 2019 book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, is currently a #1 nonfiction bestseller.
It is indeed, and I can see why. I recently read this book by Ibram X. Kendi, which waves together an electrifying combination of ethics, law, science, and history, including the story of his own awakening to anti-racism. How to Be an Anti-Racist promises to become an essential book for anyone who wants to go beyond an awareness of racism to the next step of forming truly just and equitable society. The author simply covers a broad spectrum of racism, such as being hostile to white people simply because they're white is also racist, and that black people can also be racist towards other black people. Let us first find out about the crucial difference between the terms not racist and anti-racist.
What's the difference between being not racist and being anti-racist?
Well, historically, whenever people are challenged for saying and doing something that's racist, typically their response is, I'm not racist. No matter what they just said, no matter what they just did.
Yes, like our Phyllis over here.
I'm not a sexist. I just really don't want it to be a woman. I just feel that women are generally less competent than men and less rational. Again, I'm not a sexist.
You can laugh all about it, but it happens more often than you think, and the people who hold these seemingly self-contradicting beliefs truly believe in those ideas, and I personally experienced many analogous arguments with regards to race from my closest friends.
By contrast, someone who is striving to be anti-racist is actually willing to admit the times in which they express racist ideas. They're willing to admit the times in which they sort of support racist policies because they're in a process of changing. They're changing themselves. They're seeking to change society. They're not necessarily in denial.
Yes, an anti-racist is not just neutral. He or she fights to eliminate racial inequality as well as the policies and ideas that cause these inequalities. The author preaches that we have a moral obligation as a functioning member of society to do so. The objective of this video is to summarize this book into 7 concepts so that people who don't intend to read the whole book would still benefit and thus contribute to a just society. Anti-racist, no racial inequality is fueled by racist policies. So what do we mean by these terms and how does the author define them? A racist is someone who communicates ideas that are racist or who supports racist policies, either actively or just being unsympathetic, like this lady over here.
Said that it was going to be all white, and we were very happy to buy a home here.
Do you think a Negro family moving here will affect the community as a whole?
Definitely. The whole trouble with this integration business is that in the end, it probably will end up with mixing socially. And you will have, well, I think their aim is mixed marriages and becoming equal with the whites.
Wow.
A racist idea is one that posits any racial group as being better or worse than another, either biologically or culturally or in any other aspect. Racist policy is any law, process, or rule that creates racial inequity. Now, to witness all these 3 concepts that we just discussed in action, here we go.
Than Lee Atwater, a top Republican campaign strategist who worked for, among others, Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Here he is, spelling out the whole game in 1981. And I'm going to warn you, you're about to hear the N-word a lot.
You start out in 1954 by saying nigger, nigger, nigger. By 1968, you can't say nigger. That hurts you, backfire. So you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you get it so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. We want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than nigger nigger.
Holy shit.
If you still have time, please watch the documentary 13 by Ava DuVernay. A link is in the description. And also try reading about redlining, Jim Crow, segregation to realize how historically African Americans are disenfranchised. But 2, Racist ideas about white people are still racist. The author points to the teachings of Nation of Islam, an African-American religious movement that once claimed civil rights activist Malcolm X amongst its followers. Things of this movement are so controversial that it believes that white people are a race of pale-skinned devils created by evil African scientists thousands of years ago. Kendi argues that Nation of Islam's white devil philosophy is inherently racist. Indeed, for the author, it is a perfect example of a phenomenon that racism can be directed by black people towards white people as well, a phenomenon called reverse racism. Anti-racists understand that culture of white people is not inherently more oppressive than any other culture, and being anti-racist means rejecting all the racism, whoever the target is. Number 3. Racist ideas about color perpetuate the myth that lighter is better. There are an unbelievable number of skin color types that people attribute to African Americans.
Maroon, septum, yellow, high yellow.
Probably the most inflammatory that I remember being called piss-colored.
Piss-colored yellow.
Piss-colored yellow. Actually, I thought I was dark-skinned until I went down south. They called me a red bone down there. They said, you red.
Bone, red, yellow bone, lacquered.
Food analogies: chocolate, cocoa,
chocolate, caramel, walnut, white chocolate, cocoa.
And of course, on the darker end of the spectrum, there's all the more derogatory terms like darkie.
I always find it fascinating that most of the time people think that the things that they are saying are a compliment, even when I find them to be like really offensive.
To be an anti-racist, one must understand that colorism has historically discriminated against darker-skinned people of color while privileging lighter-skinned people of color. Let's take a look at some examples of the expressions of colorism based on real statistical data. Firstly, studies have found that white voters favor black politicians with lighter skin tone over those who are darker, and white children have more positive feelings towards lighter black kids than about darker black kids. Studies consistently show that employers have been shown to prefer lighter skinned candidates over their darker counterparts, no matter how qualified the later group might be. Lastly, your color affects your experience of justice system too, with dark-skinned African Americans receiving longer jail terms than those with lighter skin. We can also see colorism when we look at today's mainstream beauty standards, which mostly revolve around having lighter skin. And in the spirit of this book's key message, I would like to confess that I too bought into the notion of being fairer or whiter is better, because I grew up in India where this is still mainstream.
कुछ कमी है. Lovely Ayurvedic balance, कुदरती निखार. मधुबाला भी आज खुश होती. नई Fair and Lovely.
कंधा बना, कंधा बना, कंधा बना, कंधा बना.
सिर्फ पोज मारोगे तो कंधा बनकर रह जाओगे. Handsome बन. बंदावन. नया फेयर एंड हैंडसम फेयरनेस क्रीम मर्दों की सख्त त्वचा के लिए. इसका 5 एक्शन फेयरनेस सिस्टम दे लॉन्ग लास्टिंग गोरापन. नया फेयर एंड हैंडसम.
Yeah, a country where majority of people are brown and somehow many of them are ashamed of themselves. How can one be color anti-racist? Well, first, we should understand that in a world in which racial gains tend to go to lighter-skinned people, while losses disproportionately affect darker-skinned people, is not fair, and that inequality inside a racial group can just be as devastating as that between the racial groups.